It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
Oh man, Greg, maybe one day in my future, just for 30 seconds, I can have that kind of voice, or I could get rich doing commercials. Anyway.
Well, I can tell you that by the way, that's the voice of Gary Harrison. Some of you may remember him from Air America, Go Harrison.
Yes.
And I can't tell you he's not getting rich from his voice, but he definitely has one of the more famous voices in radio.
Let me ask you, are you at all, Greg,
Yes.
interested in what Ginni Thomas has to say to anybody, and should we care about it? Because she's out there now doing her thing. She's standing by her word.
Whether you like it or not, Dennis, I'm sorry, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to pay very close attention to what Ginni Thomas, her friends call her Ginni. To us, she's Virginia. Virginia Thomas, who is, she says kind of accidentally, and it doesn't mean anything, she happens to be married to the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Today, she had her behind hauled before the January 6th committee. Now, what the heck is the Supreme Court Justice's wife doing testifying? It's closed doors, so unfortunately we don't have her words before the committee. But she was before the committee, but we know what they were asking her about for sure. Despite the fact that her husband's sitting on the Supreme Court, she decided that she's going to participate in overturning the November 2020 election. And she sent, I want to get the number right, I think it's 39 text messages at minimum to Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, in the 2 weeks after the election. Now, she may have sent more, but Mark Meadows, who had turned over those texts, among others, to the January 6th committee, stopped cooperating. So there might be other texts. But we know that she was writing the chief of staff, telling him to stand firm, hold tight, and make sure that we help the great president stand firm. This is from one of the notes to the president's chief of staff. Mark, you are the leader with him who is standing for America's constitutional government at the precipice. The majority knows Biden and the left. You know, Biden's on the left. Biden and the left is attempting. That's bad grammar. Biden and the left are attempting. But she wrote, Biden and the left is attempting to the greatest heist of our history. Listen to Rush. She wants them to listen to Rush Limbaugh, but also to a woman named Cleta Mitchell, who we have discussed when I talk about those challenges to voters. That was created by a group called True the Vote, whose lawyer and the lawyer for the Bradley Foundation, the new Koch brothers, the right-wing billionaires, the Bradleys. Their director is Cleta Mitchell. She was on the phone call with Donald Trump to the Secretary of State of Georgia, telling him to, quote, find 11,000 votes to overturn the election. This is who Clarence Thomas's wife is saying that Meadows should listen to. And then on top of it, she sent endless number of texts and contacts to state legislators in Arizona and Wisconsin, suggesting that they ignore the vote of the public and not certify the Biden electors, but rather pick what she called a, quote, clean slate of electors. By clean, she means, of course, Trump's set of electors.
Right.
So the question is, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with her saying, I disagree with the election, save us, and telling legislators to ignore the will of the voters? Well, one, it's creepy. We don't ignore voters in America. The other is that the Constitution makes it clear how you pick electors to the Electoral College to choose our president. Yeah, we don't have a direct democracy, which is a discussion for another time or another revolution. But there's still some rules. It can't just be what Ginni Thomas wants. There's a procedure, and in fact, the question is whether she was in fact suborning these people to commit a crime, asking to join a conspiracy to ignore the will of the voters and pick fake electors and send them on to Mike Pence. She was also in contact with the lawyer Eastman, who came up with this cockamamie scheme to replace real electors with fakos. Now,
and she's not backing off.
Go ahead.
And just to be clear, she is not backing off. Even the people who she's quoted who've changed their minds haven't changed hers.
Right. She is still saying that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, and also that she did nothing wrong by telling legislators to overturn, to ignore the vote of the people and pick a slate of electors who would then go to the electoral vote college and vote for Trump. Now, one of the things that people are asking is the obvious thing: is there a conflict of interest here? Well, on its face and very technically, just because you're married to Supreme Court justice does not mean that you are now barred from doing anything in public politically or expressing your views. However, here's the problem. Already there's been a conflict. The Supreme Court had a rule on whether Mark Meadows and the president and others had to release their documents. And Clarence Thomas, it would be shocking and not credible that Clarence Thomas didn't know that his wife was furiously texting the White House and furiously texting Meadows and sending out these missives to Arizona, et cetera. Well, if you know that you are ruling on whether records should be open, which would show your wife's involvement or complicity in this scheme, what else is a conflict of interest? Or as the Center for Ethics and Responsibility said, Clarence Thomas has to rule on whether Trump and his friends, including Thomas's wife, were illegally involved in overturning an election. So he literally voted. He was the only one of the 9 Supreme Court justices to vote not to open up the White House records. And he had to know that his wife's nasty little missives were in those records. If there was ever a conflict of interest, now you're saying, well, where are the other Supremes? Where is some type of ethics panel? The answer is that the Supreme Court has given to itself a special rule which applies to no other judge in America, that only the judge who's accused of a conflict may recuse themselves. In other words, the other justices can't say, hey, Clarence, man, it's your wife. You can't be ruling on this case. It's totally up to Clarence Thomas. Doesn't matter what the others think. And there's been apparently some testy internal conversations at the court about this. But this is guy's ruling about whether his wife should be investigated.
It's an amazing story. We're obviously going to continue to follow it. You're listening to the Election Crimes Bulletin on Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. We do this with Greg Palast every week. We've been working with Greg since against election thievery and election crimes way back in the day. We continue to do this work. The battle is on. The battle for Atlanta is on. Greg's got a new documentary. We're going to take a short break. All right, you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. Greg, just to put a closure on that interview, well, tell us a little bit more about Mark Meadows. He was contacting legislators in Wisconsin and Arizona to reject Biden and choose a clean state. That's part of the whole Ginni Thomas vision, right?
Right. So the idea
essentially,
is that,
right,
the White House, working with this lawyer, Easton, who now may get disbarred for his role in saying, here's how you can steal the election. We're trying to get legislators to overturn the slates of electors. Now, just so you understand, under Article 2 of the Constitution, I'm sure many of you are thumbing through that Constitution right now as we speak. Under Article 2, it doesn't say citizens choose the president. It says state legislators choose the electors. It was that was a decision by Adams, John Quincy Adams, actually the son too, involved, trying to prevent direct democracy. Adams really believed that there was nothing more dangerous than democracy. So he wanted this republic where it would be like several steps of remove. Unfortunately, what that's led to is this kind of, well, who actually picks the president? Because was Ginni Thomas or Mark Meadows, who was chief of staff, he's ultra-right-wing congressman that became chief of staff to Trump, got deep up to his knickers in this overturning the electoral college voter, trying to get Pence to go along with this scheme. That, he was trying to use that Article 2. And right now, by the way, Mitch McConnell is talking about not changing the Constitution, but there's a related law called the Electoral Count Act to try to, that they might switch that around. But that's all eyewash. The truth is that these were not these electors in Wisconsin, Arizona, and the rest of the country. One way we've gotten a little bit back towards democracy is that states have said that the legislatures must follow the will of their voters, so that you may not be violating the U.S. Constitution, but actually be violating state law. And of course, if you're conspiring to overturn the election through illegal slates of electors, then you've got yourself a criminal offense. And that's one of the big things that Fani Willis is investigating in Atlanta. So it's really quite, in a way, it's a legal sense. It's a technical question, but these guys were basically trying to figure out any way that they could to tell legislators.
I mean, it's so freaking obvious. I sort of want to scream.